Let me tell you something real, and I want you to hear it with your heart, not your fear. When a man can go days without talking to you, it hits deep. You start questioning everything. Did I do something wrong? Is he losing interest? Does he even care? And the silence, it gets louder every single day. But here's the truth most women don't realize. A man's distance is not always about you. It's often about what he feels safe doing. See, when you keep reaching out, checking in, trying to fix the silence, you unknowingly teach him that he doesn't have to show up. Because no matter how long he disappears, you'll still be there. Now listen carefully. The moment you shift that dynamic, the moment you stop chasing and start choosing yourself, that's when everything changes. This is not about playing games. This is about understanding value, energy, and emotional power. And once you understand this, you won't be the one waiting anymore. You'll be the one he's afraid to lose. You have to understand something that most people don't talk about honestly. People repeat what works for them, not what's right, not what's fair, what works. So when a man can disappear for days, come back with a simple message, and still receive your warmth, your attention, your excitement, in his mind, that behavior is acceptable. He may not even sit there and think about it consciously, but emotionally, he registers it as, I can do this and I won't lose her. That's the part that hurts, because from your side, you're not trying to reward bad behavior. You're just being loving, understanding, patient. You tell yourself, maybe he's busy, maybe he's going through something. I don't want to seem difficult. And those thoughts come from a good place, but if you're not careful, they turn into a pattern where your kindness gets taken for granted. The truth is, when there are no boundaries, there is no motivation for change. A man doesn't suddenly wake up and decide to do better if everything around him tells him he's already doing enough. And if every time he comes back after disappearing, you respond quickly, warmly, and without any shifting your energy, then from his perspective, nothing is broken. There's nothing to fix. This is where a lot of women get stuck. They think, if I love him more, he'll realize my value. But value is not just about what you give. It's about what you require in return. If you require nothing, if you accept everything, then your presence starts to feel like something that will always be there, no matter what. And people don't fight for what they believe they'll never lose. Now let's be clear about something. You don't need to become cold, rude, or dramatic. This is not about punishing him or playing games. That kind of behavior only creates confusion and pushes things in the wrong direction. What you need is something much more powerful: control, calm, self-respect. That starts with how you respond. If he goes days without talking to you and then suddenly shows up like nothing happened, you don't meet him with the same level of availability you used to. You don't drop everything to respond instantly. You don't pour energy into someone who has been giving you crumbs. Instead, you pause. You take your time. You respond when it feels right for you, not when it's convenient for him. That small shift speaks louder than any argument ever could, because now, instead of you adjusting to his behavior, he starts noticing that something has changed. He starts feeling that your attention is no longer guaranteed. And that feeling uncertainty is what creates awareness. And awareness is what leads to effort. Right now, if he feels like he can come and go without consequence, there's no reason for him to step up. But the moment he senses that your energy is no longer freely available, he starts paying closer attention. He starts wondering, why didn't she reply like before? Is something different? Is she pulling away? And that's not manipulation. That's a natural reaction to a change in dynamics. You have to realize that attention is a form of emotional currency. Every time you give it freely to someone who isn't investing in you, you lower its value in their eyes. Not because you're not valuable, but because you're not protecting that value. Think about it this way: anything is always available, always accessible, and never requires effort eventually gets taken for granted. But the moment there's a sense that it could be lost, its importance rises. So when you stop rewarding his absence with your presence, you create a new standard without even saying a word. And yes, it might feel uncomfortable at first. You might feel the urge to respond quickly, to keep things normal, to avoid any tension. That's your emotional habit trying to pull you back into the same cycle. But growth always feels uncomfortable in the beginning. You have to sit with that discomfort and remind yourself why you're doing this. You're not trying to push him away. You're trying to teach him how to treat you. without begging, without explaining, without losing yourself. Because the reality is, if someone truly values you, they will notice when your energy shifts. They will feel it. And if they care, they will adjust. But if they don't notice, or worse, they notice and still choose not to step up, then you've learned something even more important. You've learned that you were investing in someone who was comfortable giving you less than you deserve. And that's not a loss, that's clarity. The goal here is not to force someone to chase you. The goal is to stop chasing someone who isn't showing up for you. There's a big difference. When you stop rewarding his absence, you're not just changing how he sees you, you're changing how you see yourself. You're reminding yourself that your time matters, your attention matters, your presence matters. And once you truly understand that, you stop handing those things out to someone who hasn't earned them. That's when your energy shifts from, I hope he chooses me, so I choose what's right for me. And that shift, that's where your real power begins. You need to understand that silence by itself is not power. It only becomes powerful when it comes from a place of emotional control, not emotional pain. A lot of women say, I'll just stop texting him and see what happens. But inside, they're still anxious, still checking their phone every few minutes, still hoping that the silence will force him to respond. That kind of silence doesn't create attraction. It creates tension within you. And whether you realize it or not, that energy has a way of showing up and how you react the moment he finally reaches out. There's a big difference between silence that is used as a strategy and silence that comes from self-respect. Strategy is temporary. Self-respect is consistent. If you're being silent just to get a reaction, you'll break the moment you don't get the response you expected. But when your silence comes from a place of, I'm not going to overextend myself for someone who isn't meeting me halfway, then you are no longer waiting, you're choosing. That shift is everything. Because when a man feels that your silence is filled with expectation, it doesn't pull him in, it actually gives him space to stay comfortable. He assumes she'll reach out eventually. She always does. There's no curiosity, no urgency, no emotional movement on his side. But when your silence feels different, when it feels grounded, calm, and detached from needing him, that's when it starts to speak. And it speaks loudly. You don't have to announce anything. You don't have to send long messages explaining how you feel. In fact, over-explaining often weakens your position because it shows that you're trying to convince someone to understand your value instead of simply standing in it. Powerful silence removes the need for explanation. It says, without words, I'm not going to chase connection. I'm going to align with it. That's the kind of energy that makes someone stop and think. Now, here's where most people get it wrong. They think silence means doing nothing. But real, powerful silence is not empty. It's full. It's filled with your own life, your own priorities, your own sense of direction. You're not sitting there waiting for him to text, you're actually living. And that matters more than you think, because when your life is full, your mind is not constantly looping around one person's absence. You're not analyzing every small detail, not overthinking every delay, not attaching your mood to whether or not he reaches out. You become emotionally stable, and that stability changes the way you show up. When he finally does message you, you're not rushing to reply with built-up emotion. You're calm, you're centered. You respond, not react. And that difference in energy is something you will notice, even if he can't explain it. Men are very sensitive to shifts in energy. They might not always communicate it clearly, but they feel when something changes. When a woman who used to be highly available becomes less predictable, less reactive, and more focused on her own world, it creates a sense of intrigue. He starts to wonder what you're doing. He starts to question whether he still has the same place in your life. And that curiosity naturally leads him to reach out, not because he's being forced to, but because something inside him wants to reconnect. But again, this only works if your silence is real. If you're silent on the outside, but desperate on the inside, it will eventually show. Maybe not immediately, but over time. It comes out in how quickly you respond, how much you give when he returns, how easily you fall back into the same pattern. That's why this isn't just about behavior. It's about mindset. You have to reach a point where your peace is not dependent on his attention. That doesn't mean you don't care. It doesn't mean you shut down emotionally. It simply means you're no longer placing your emotional stability in someone else's hands. You care, but you're not controlled. You're open, but you're not available to inconsistency. That's a powerful place to be. And here's something else you need to accept. Silence will reveal the truth. It doesn't create feelings that weren't there. It exposes what already exists. If he values you, your silence will make him lean in. If he doesn't, he'll drift further away. And that's where you have to be honest with yourself. Because the goal is not to use silence to manipulate someone into caring. The goal is to step back and allow their actions to show you how much they actually do. Silence removes the noise. It removes the constant communication that can sometimes hide a lack of real effort. When everything goes quiet, what remains is intention. If he reaches out, if he shows effort, if he tries to reconnect, that tells you something. But if he stays distant, if he makes no move, if he seems unaffected, that also tells you something. And while that truth might be hard to accept, it's far better than staying in a cycle of confusion. You deserve clarity, not mixed signals. So your silence should never come from a place of fear, hoping it will bring him back. It should come from a place of strength, knowing that you're not going to chase someone who isn't choosing you clearly. When you operate from that mindset, your silence becomes more than just absence, it becomes a statement. It says, I value myself enough to not overextend where I'm not appreciated. And the right person, they won't ignore that. They'll respect it. They'll respond to it. They'll respond to it. They'll meet you in that space. But even more importantly, you'll start respecting yourself on a deeper level. And once you reach that point, you won't just be waiting for someone to text you back. You'll be deciding if they even deserve access to you at all. You have to be honest with yourself about something that's uncomfortable but important. A person cannot miss what they never truly lose. And if he can go days without talking to you and still feel completely at ease, it usually means he hasn't actually felt your absence in any real way. Now, that doesn't mean you're not important. It means your presence has been so consistent, so accessible, that even when he's not actively talking to you, he still feels like you're there. He knows he can come back at any moment and pick up where he left off. There's no doubt, no uncertainty, no emotional distance that makes him stop and think. And without that space, there's nothing for him to miss. A lot of women unintentionally fill that space without realizing it. Even when they stop texting, they're still watching his stories, liking his posts, staying quietly connected to his world. Or when he finally reaches out after disappearing, they respond immediately, almost with relief, as if the silence never happened. From his perspective, nothing has changed. The connection is still available on his terms. So he never gets the chance to feel what life is like without your energy. And that's the key, your energy. It's not just about physical presence or messages. It's about emotional availability. When your attention, your care, your responsiveness are always there in the background, he doesn't experience the contrast of having you versus not having you. And without contrast, there's no appreciation. Think about anything in life. People only truly recognize value when there's a moment of absence. When something is always there, it becomes part of the background. But when it's gone, even for a while, it creates a shift. It forces awareness. That's exactly what needs to happen here. You have to allow the space he created to actually exist. And that means pulling your energy back in a real way, not halfway, not temporarily, not just on the surface. It means you stop engaging with him in all the subtle ways that keep you present in his life without requiring effort from him. You don't check his updates. You don't react to everything he posts. You don't make yourself emotionally available the second he decides to show up again. You give the situation room to breathe. Now, this is where it gets difficult because your instinct will try to pull you back. You'll feel the urge to check what he's doing, to stay connected in small ways, to make sure you're not being forgotten. That urge comes from attachment, from wanting reassurance. But if you give in to that, you erase the very space that would have made him notice your absence. You have to be disciplined enough to sit in that quiet without trying to fill it. Because when you truly step back, something shifts. He no longer feels your constant presence. He no longer sees your name pop up, no longer senses that you're right there waiting in the background. And at first, he might not react immediately. That's important to understand. People don't always notice change the moment it happens. But over time, the absence becomes noticeable. He starts to feel that something is different. Maybe he checks to see if you posted anything. Maybe he wonders why you haven't interacted with him. Maybe he thinks about reaching out and then pauses, realizing that the dynamic isn't the same as before. That's when the space starts doing its work. Because now, instead of you thinking about him all the time, he starts thinking about you. Not because you forced him to, not because you asked him to, but because there's a gap that didn't exist before. And human nature is simple. We are drawn to what feels like it's slipping away. But here's where you need to stay grounded. The goal is not to create space just to make him chase you. The goal is to stop overextending yourself where there isn't equal effort. The space is a byproduct of you choosing yourself, not a trick to control someone else's behavior. Because if your only intention is to get a reaction, you'll struggle to maintain it. The moment he doesn't respond the way you hope, you'll feel tempted to go back to your old habits, reaching out, checking in, reopening the door you just closed. But if your intention is to protect your energy, to stop giving without receiving, then you'll stay consistent. You'll understand that whatever happens next is information, not rejection. And that mindset keeps you strong. Now let's be real, there are two possible outcomes when you create this space. One, he feels your absence, he recognizes the shift, and he reaches out with more intention. Maybe he puts in more effort. Maybe he becomes more consistent. Maybe he tries to close the distance that he once created. If that happens, you don't immediately fall back into old patterns. You observe, you respond with balance. You allow him to show you over time that his effort is real. Or two, he doesn't step up. He stays distant. He doesn't reach out. He doesn't try to reconnect in a meaningful way. And that outcome, as painful as it might feel, is actually clarity. It shows you that the connection was being held together by your effort more than his. And that's something you need to know, because staying in a situation where you're the only one maintaining the connection will slowly drain you. It will make you question your worth, your value, your importance in someone's life. And the longer you stay in that cycle, the harder it becomes to break free from it. So when you pull your energy back and allow the space to exist, you're not just creating an opportunity for him to miss you. You're also creating an opportunity for yourself to see the truth. You're stepping out of the illusion of constant communication and into the reality of genuine effort. And that's powerful, because once you see things clearly, you stop settling for half-hearted attention. You stop accepting inconsistency as normal. You stop convincing yourself that this is just how he is. Instead, you start asking the better question. Is this what I truly want for myself? And that question changes everything. Because when you reach a point where you value your own emotional well-being more than the comfort of a familiar pattern, you stop trying to hold on to people who are okay with losing you. You let the space do its job. You let his actions reveal his intentions. And most importantly, you give yourself the respect of not filling a gap that he chose to create. That's when the dynamic shifts, not just for him, but for you. And that's when you stop feeling like you're waiting and start realizing you were always the one who had the power to step back. One of the hardest truths to accept is this: the more you sit around waiting for someone to show up, the more you slowly disconnect from your own life. You start organizing your day around a message that may or may not come. You check your phone first thing in the morning, last thing at night, and somewhere in between, your mood rises and falls, based on whether his name appears on your screen. That's not love. That's emotional dependency. And if you're being real with yourself, it doesn't feel good. It feels draining. It feels uncertain. It feels like you're constantly in a state of almost getting the attention you want, almost feeling secure, almost feeling true. But almost is not enough for a woman who truly values herself. This is where you have to make a shift that changes everything, not just in this situation, but in every relationship you'll ever have. You have to stop focusing on waiting for someone else to act and start focusing on becoming someone who is deeply fulfilled, grounded, and complete within her own life. Because here's the reality: when your life is centered around one person's attention, you give them power they didn't earn. And when you take that focus back and invest it into yourself, you take that power back where it belongs. Now, this doesn't mean you stop caring. It doesn't mean you become cold or disconnected. It means you stop making someone the center of your emotional world when they're only giving you a small piece of theirs. You start asking yourself better questions. Instead of "why isn't he texting me?" you ask. You ask, "why am I giving so much importance to someone who isn't consistent?" Instead of "what can I do to make him reach out?" You ask, what can I do to build a life that feels so full that I'm not waiting on anyone? That shift in focus is where your growth begins. Because when you start investing in yourself, your goals, your confidence, your peace, you begin to change in ways that are impossible to ignore. You carry yourself differently. You think differently. You respond differently. And most importantly, you no longer tolerate the same things you once accepted. You're not as easily impressed by a random message after days of silence. You're not as quick to give your time and attention to someone who hasn't earned it. You become more selective, more intentional, and that's where your value truly rises. A man can feel when a woman is waiting on him. There's a certain energy to it and availability that feels easy, predictable, guaranteed. But he can also feel when a woman has her own life, her own priorities, her own sense of direction. That kind of woman doesn't chase, she attracts. Not because she's trying to impress anyone, but because her life naturally creates that pull. When you're busy building yourself, you're not sitting around analyzing his behavior. You're not overthinking every delay. Your mind is occupied with things that actually move your life forward. And ironically, that's when you become more interesting, more desirable, more magnetic, because now your attention is no longer something he can take for granted. And here's the part most people don't expect. The moment you genuinely stop needing his attention is often the moment he starts seeking yours. Not because you played a perfect game, but because your energy shifted. You're no longer reaching, no longer chasing, no longer trying to hold on to something that feels uncertain. You stepped into a space where you're okay with or without him. And that energy is powerful. It creates curiosity. It creates attraction. It makes him wonder what changed, what you're doing, why you're not as available as before. And that curiosity often leads him to reach out. But this is where you need to stay grounded. Because when he does come back, you cannot forget the version of yourself you became during that time. You cannot abandon your growth just because he's showing a little more attention. If you do, you'll fall right back into the same cycle. You have to remain consistent. You respond, but you don't overextend. You engage, but you don't lose yourself. You allow him to show effort, but you don't reward inconsistency. Because at this point, it's no longer about getting him to reach out. It's about deciding whether his effort is even enough for you. That's a completely different mindset. You're no longer impressed by words alone. You're watching actions. You're paying attention to patterns. You're asking yourself, is this the kind of consistency I deserve? And if the answer is no, you have the strength to walk away, not out of anger, not out of ego, but out of self-respect. That's what real growth looks like. It's not about becoming someone who never feels anything. It's about becoming someone who feels deeply but chooses wisely, someone who can care without losing herself, someone who can walk away from what isn't right, even when it's hard. Because at the end of the day, the goal is not to make one specific man chase you. The goal is to become a woman who no longer settles for being an option. When you reach that level, everything changes. You stop accepting delayed effort as meaningful. You stop confusing attention with intention. You stop holding on to potential and start valuing reality. And that's where you naturally attract better, because you're no longer operating from a place of lack. You're operating from a place of abundance. You know what you bring. You know what you deserve. And you're no longer afraid to walk away from anything that doesn't align with that. So instead of sitting there waiting for a message, you build a light that doesn't pause for anyone. You grow, you evolve, you elevate. And in that process, you don't just become more attractive to him, you become more aligned with yourself. And that's the kind of transformation that doesn't just change one situation, it changes your entire standard for what you accept and love.